It's now time for the Weekly with News 6 morning anchor Justin Warmoth.
This is the Weekly on ClickOrlando.com with Justin Warmoth.
Good morning, I'm Justin Warmoth. The League of Women Voters turns 100 years old next year, and their influence on policy from the federal to the state level is only growing. This morning, the president of the Florida chapter, Patricia Brigham, is joining us to explain what the League is pushing for as we look ahead to 2020. And Patricia, thank you so much for joining us today.
Pleasure to be here.
You know, a lot going on as we move into 2020, a lot that hasn't been talked about just because it's so far away. But I wanted to bring you in and talk about some of the things that you guys are really pushing for voters to approve or vote for as we move into the 2020 election. So the first one that I found very interesting, and I always wondered this just as a voter, how come as an independent voter you can't vote during the primary election? This proposed constitutional amendment has enough signatures, and it looks like it's going to be on the ballot. It's pending, obviously, approval from the state Supreme Court.
Right.
Tell us why the League of Women Voters is for this proposed amendment.
Well, we believe in open primaries. We did a study in 2015, which went on for 2 years. And it found that in Florida, voter participation in the primaries was 23%, while the national average was 37%. So clearly, we weren't getting enough people out to the polls during the primaries. And why is that? Because if you're affiliated with a minor party or with no party affiliation, and we're seeing a growing rate of young people especially, not interested in being affiliated with one party or another. So if you don't have those major party affiliations, Democrat or Republican, then you are not able to vote in the primary because Florida is a closed primary state, one of only 9 states in the country who continues to be closed primary.
And when it comes to this amendment, we're not talking about anything that's at the federal level at this point.
No.
This is the state level, cabinet, governor, state legislators as well.
Correct.
Eventually, I think you want to get this one done, I would imagine, or the authors of this amendment, they want to get this one done before moving on to that, just kind of separating it. But there's some opposition from both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. Why do you think there is opposition to this?
Well, that is so interesting because it's actually uniting the parties for a change, because usually we have such a partisan divide, but both of the major parties don't like the open primary system. And that is because they are pro-party, and the League of Women Voters is pro-voter, and open primaries are pro-voter.
So explain how this would happen. So basically, a list of the candidates, it has their party affiliation, obviously, and is it a top 2? Is it one from each party? Explain this.
The voter would receive a ballot that lists all of the candidates, no matter their party, and it is a top 2. So the candidates who receive the most votes, the 2 candidates, would go on to the general.
So it's basically a runoff, essentially, right?
Well, the general would serve as the runoff.
Serve as the runoff, right. So in theory, you could have 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, or one of each.
Well, yes, but Florida is a purple state.
It sure is.
So the number of Republicans and the number of Democrats are close in Florida. So we're not a state like California. We are definitely a purple state. So it's very unlikely that you're going to see 2 candidates from the same party on the general election ballot. Unless
you live in a district that leans one way or the other.
That
could be a factor. But it's interesting, and I think you know, as we see more and more, as you mentioned, we have 3.7 million NPA, independent voters, now in the state of Florida. It continues to grow. And as we see this trend, more and more people are going to the polls probably saying, I'm looking forward to casting my ballot for whoever's running in the primary. How come I can't do that? And this would be a way to fix that. So it has enough signatures, but do you think that ultimately it will be on the 2020 ballot? What is your guess on that?
It looks very likely that it will be on the 2020 ballot, and we do support the open primary. In our study, the number 1 open primary that we like is the open primary, true open primary, which is you go into the polling place, you get the ballot, you can say, I want the Republican ballot or I want the Democrat ballot. And But this will have one ballot with all of the parties.
Yeah, the concern, I think, is when you say, I want whichever ballot, you could have someone who is maybe an independent, but a Democrat going in and saying, I want the Republican ballot, and choosing the lesser of the candidate in their eyes against who they would want to, and vice versa.
That's true, but many times they're doing that already in the general, and this is going to increase voter turnout. And we want to encourage our young people to vote. And when we see millennials in bigger numbers going to a non-party affiliation, and then if they're not educating themselves or not coming to our education seminars on voting, they're going to arrive there, find out, wait a minute, I can't vote in the primary.
Right.
We don't want them to become discouraged and say, well, forget it, we're not going to vote in the general. We want to set a lifelong habit of voting that begins when you're eligible to vote.
It also makes people pay attention to the primaries, because a lot of people just feel like, hey, I don't need to pay attention until we get into the general as we get closer to November. This forces them to pay attention to all candidates.
It's a critical election because it determines, as you know, who moves on to the general.
2020 legislative session is something you guys will be involved in, as you always are. What are your priorities going forward as we look at the 2020 legislative session?
Well, we have a number of priorities, but number one is election. We are concerned about fair elections, we're concerned about secure elections, and we want to see things that make sense for Florida, like same-day voter registration, automatic voter registration. There are a number of voter improvements that we would like to see happen, or voting improvements, rather. And of course, last year, in 2018, we had the simultaneous recounts. So we'd like real improvements to our election system.
Do you think what happened is discouraging people from wanting to go to the polls again?
I hope not, and the league is going to do our very best to make sure we get out the vote.
Yeah, it seems to be a critical thing. 2020 census as well.
Extremely important.
Explain to our viewers why this is so important.
Because an accurate count determines what kind of government funding is going to be provided based on the areas that you live in. And so if the government doesn't have an accurate count and there are certain needs in certain communities, you may not receive the funding that's necessary for your community.
It's expected that Florida will gain 2 congressional seats.
It's possible.
Based on what they project.
Right.
We've seen population boom. Other states have seen population loss. People are coming here, they're going to Texas as well, Arizona, and so it's really critical. Redistricting also, that's what the census also will bring.
Absolutely.
And I know that's a few years after the census is held, but that's something that I would imagine you guys will be focused on, making sure something like what happened previously doesn't happen again.
You bet we will. We got fair districts in the past, and we will make sure that we get them again. And we will have our eyes closely on the census, and we're going to be doing a lot of public education on the census to make citizens aware of how critical this is.
Coming up, what the League of Women Voters is prioritizing in Florida's 2020 legislative session. Stay with us.
This is The Weekly on ClickOrlando.com with Justin Warmoth.
Welcome back. There are many issues the League of Women Voters has an eye on as we approach Florida's 2020 legislative session. Patricia Brigham, the president of the League's Florida chapter, is back with us to explain the pieces of legislation they're urging Florida lawmakers to pass. Education is another focus of yours for the legislative session.
It is.
The governor comes out with his plan to boost minimum starting pay for teachers. The Florida Education Association is not for that plan. It doesn't include all teachers, not inclusive. Right. What would you like to see happen?
Well, the concern is that it's not inclusive to veteran teachers.
Exactly.
And as you know, there are many teachers out there who've worked for years in the system, and to not consider them and in these kind of pay raises is really not justifiable.
So what will you be telling our lawmakers and trying to get the point across to them as we start? What would you guys, as you've talked to educators, I'm sure, across the state, what's the ideal thing that they would like to see happen?
Well, that's number one. You know, pay attention to our veteran teachers. And, you know, teachers are leaving the profession. That shouldn't be happening. A teacher is one of the most noble professions out there. Education is so important, you know, for every kind of career and in voting, informed voting. Also, these vouchers that give public dollars to private schools, we're very concerned about that. You know, public money should not be going to private schools who don't have to meet the same curriculum standards or testing standards as public schools.
Do you find it troubling that education has become so political?
Very. This should not be a political issue. And of course, there are other issues out there too that should not be a political issue. Education should be something that we value. We should be valuing quality, not public funding for private schools.
Another thing that has been happening for years at the state level in Tallahassee is the rating of the Sadowski Fund, and we have seen what that has caused with affordable housing. That is going to be another push. I read your issues on the website, as you can see, and that one is so critical. And I think that's going to be just widespread as this issue has really become a monster, and we're seeing the lack of affordable housing, especially here in Central Florida. What will you be doing in Tallahassee?
Well, we're raising awareness about that issue. We have a statewide action team that is studying affordable housing, is very concerned about the Sadowski Fund. But we see a bipartisan effort in Tallahassee. A press conference just happened recently, you know, where they're pushing, you know, this money to go to affordable housing and not other issues. It needs to be going to affordable housing.
And so many of these issues, it seems that they should have bipartisan support.
Yes.
It doesn't always happen,
No.
unfortunately. One more thing as we talk about 2020 legislative session, then I'll move on, is guns.
Yes.
Some of the things that obviously you guys have pushed for in the past have not gone through. Here in the state of Florida, it's difficult, Republican-controlled legislature. What will you be pushing for in 2020?
Right. Well, and this is another issue that is unfortunately partisan. When gun safety is about protecting society from easy access to firearms, and we're seeing an increase in mass shootings. And of course, a lot of these mass shootings are happening in the home, domestic violence shootings, where 4 or more people are killed. And then, of course, these school shootings and public place shootings that just seem to be going on and on and on. So the League in 2016, after the Pulse massacre, we formed the Florida Coalition to Prevent Gun Violence. We have over 100 organizations in our coalition from all walks of life. And our priorities have been a ban on semi-automatic assault weapons and high-capacity magazines, expanding background checks as well to close the private seller loophole. And of course, we sit on the committee to ban assault weapons now, the Citizens Initiative that we are hoping to get on the ballot in 2020.
Do you think that's what it ultimately will take, a ballot initiative to get something like that done in the state of Florida? Do you think that's the route?
It could very well be. I mean, and we are delighted that once again the legislators, Representative Carlos Guillermo Smith and Senator Gary Farmer have filed the assault weapons ban initiatives, or excuse me, legislation.
Right.
But since year after year, those bills are not even put on the agenda in the committee, it looks like a constitutional initiative is going to be the way to go.
So we'll see what happens when 2020 rolls around, the legislative session. I found this really interesting. You guys give report cards on certain things. One of the report cards that I saw, electric vehicles.
Yes.
Why is this so important, and how did this all start, the attention to detail when it comes to electric charging stations?
Clean energy.
Yeah.
We have been concerned about clean energy for years. You know, we're very pro-solar, and we get involved with solar co-ops and getting folks to put solar on their homes to keep the energy clean and, of course, reduce the electric bills.
Yeah.
And these electric vehicles are the way of the future. The charging stations are extremely important. We're seeing them pop up around the state. We need more of them because the more clean energy, the better our environment. And of course, you know that Florida is ground zero for climate change.
Well, we are the Sunshine State as well, so
Yes.
solar shouldn't be an issue. you know, if someone's watching this, they're like, hey, League of Women Voters of Florida, this is something that I don't really know about.
Yeah.
Tell our viewers who may be interested in being a part of this or being involved or what have you, or just what your background is.
Sure.
Just explain to them.
Well, the League turns 100, the League of Women Voters itself, and of course it's a national organization with state affiliates, turns 100 next year, and we're thrilled and we're looking forward to the next 100 years and all the progress that we can make. But we are a nonpartisan organization. We take strong policy positions, but that's after study and reaching consensus. We do not take positions on parties or political candidates. So we are nonpartisan about the candidates and the parties, but not about the issues. And our issues are many, and we would encourage those who are interested in getting engaged civically to join the League of Women Voters. We have 29 local leagues around the state, from Pensacola to Key West and points in between. Right here in Orange County, this is one of the largest leagues in the country. So there are all sorts of ways to get involved in the league. You can certainly register voters, but we have many different issues we work on: the environment, gun safety, affordable housing, education, healthcare, immigration, and others. So there are lots of things to do in the league.
As president, and when did you become president of the League of Florida?
Yes, I became president in 2018.
So in 2018, is there one thing that you are most proud of, whatever it may be, whether it's policy or things that you've accomplished? What would you say your most proud moment has been as the president of League of Women Voters of Florida?
Well, I would say there are a couple of things, and I'm going to add one thing that happened before I became president. When I was first vice president, I'm very proud of the building of our Florida Coalition to Prevent Gun Violence, because there was really no infrastructure in place in Florida to fight gun violence before. As president, we're very proud of the fact that we relocated our office from Tallahassee, where we'd been for many, many years, to Orlando, which made more sense because most of our big leagues are in Central Florida or down south. And of course, we have a lobbying firm in Tallahassee, and we are very active in Tallahassee, and we have a lobby corps with our Tallahassee League. But that was a critical move for us, and I think it's giving us more of a profile, and hopefully will draw more members as they see that no, the League isn't just about being up in the Capitol. The League is about being all over the state and getting involved in the issues.
And my thanks to Patricia Brigham for joining us this morning. For more information on everything we talked about and to read more about the bills already filed ahead of next year's legislative session, head to clickorlando.com/weekly. I'm Justin Warmoth. Have a great Sunday.